Hello, I'm Nima Rajan, and welcome to Northwest Newsweek. Development in the Ring of Fire will see a different approach after the Ford government confirmed on Tuesday that it has dissolved the framework agreement put in place by the Wynne Liberals 5 years ago. Now, that framework included all 9 Matawa First Nations, but now the province will be looking to forge individual agreements with any willing First Nations in the Ring of Fire. Corey Nordstrom has the details.
An agreement between 9 Matawa chiefs and Ontario's then Premier Kathleen Wynne and former Minister Michael Gravel signed 5 years ago is no more. Greg Rickford, the new Minister of Northern Development and Mines, announced at an event in Sault Ste. Marie that the framework agreement had been dissolved.
Communities, Indigenous communities in the far north have come to us directly to talk about entering into bilateral memorandums of agreement, nation to nation, government to government.
Gravel was a key player in putting the agreement together. He says the news was disappointing, but hopes Rickford and the Indigenous leaders can come to terms on new agreements that benefit all.
The key to the Ring of Fire moving forward was a true partnership between First Nations and between the government and between the companies. That hasn't changed, and I believe that's still the case. So regardless of what approach this new government is taking, they have to accept and understand that their priority must be to work in partnership with the First Nations.
Ontario's Indigenous relations critic, Saul Mamakwa, echoed the disappointment felt by Gravel. He says the relationship between the government and First Nations leaders is especially key if the development is to continue.
I'm not sure what's going to come out of next. I don't know what's going to replace it, but I think it's really important that, for the government to understand that, without engagement, without working with First Nations, without that dialogue, Ring of Fire will not happen. And I know communities have been waiting for Doug Ford with his bulldozer, and he's not here yet.
In a statement released by Rickford, he touted the delays towards progress as reason for a new approach and makes clear the government is moving forward with bilateral agreements with individual First Nations. Noront, which is the largest claim holder in the Ring of Fire, has already come to an agreement with the community of Martin Falls and is working to engage additional communities as well. Corey Nordstrom, TVT News.
The chief of Ibmatung First Nation says he supports the Ford government's decision to dissolve the provincial framework agreement in the Ring of Fire. Harvey Yes-No says the past 5 years demonstrated that working together with the 8 Matawa communities wasn't as viable as previously hoped. Corey Nordstrom has the story.
Really, our partners as a First Nation, our first partners based on the treaty is Canada and Ontario.
Ibmatung Chief Harvey Yes-No makes clear that he is in favor of Ontario's recent decision to scrap the framework agreement signed in 2014 and work on partnering individually with government. Though Yes-No isn't opposed to striking a deal with other First Nations, as long as it's a win for both parties.
And if we ever get to that stage, then let's at least hammer out the kind of resources that we need, targets to be met, and so on. If it's too loosely put together, and if it's not backed up by adequate resources, and there's going to be a lot of frustration all around.
Northern Development and Mines Minister Greg Rickford announced the new approach his government is taking on Tuesday.
It's a way of doing this more akin to business than the expensive bureaucratic process that effectively had not accomplished anything.
Chief Yes-No says he has already spoke with Rickford on the matter and is hoping to leverage this fall's federal election to have his voice heard.
We know the time it takes to put a lot of these things together, and that's what our priority is, to definitely look at what we can do for this community. And so that's something that I've already talked to several ministers, both federal and provincial.
Corey Nordstrom, TVT News.
The Ontario NDP have wrapped up a 3-day full caucus meeting in Thunder Bay, with their focus squarely on challenging the Doug Ford government. Leader Andrea Horwath and her 40 MPPs also hosted a luncheon for local leaders to give them a chance to ask questions and get answers from the official opposition. Tyler Kelleher reports.
Andrea Horwath's second visit to Thunder Bay this summer was similar to the first. The cuts from the Ford government, once again a significant topic of discussion, coinciding with the general consensus that the needs of Northern Ontario continue to take a back seat to the south.
down south, where all the decisions are made, there's very little attention paid to how those decisions impact Northern Ontario, and similarly, how Northwestern Ontario differs and needs differ here than the needs in the south.
The latest cause for concern? The government's scrapping of the 5-year-old Ring of Fire framework agreement in favor of pursuing individual agreements with First Nations communities in that area.
I'm very, very troubled that this government doesn't seem to understand its treaty obligations and responsibilities and doesn't seem to respect the necessity of engaging First Nations communities.
Fort William First Nation Council member Tanis Castern reiterated the Minister of Indigenous Affairs Greg Rickford's comments on the situation, calling the government's approach of only working with willing communities disturbing. Horvath says she shares the same concerns.
The last thing I want to see is a government that pits one community against another, that creates a divide and conquer kind of scenario. That's the last thing we need. We need to be working together. We need to be supporting each other, and we need to be unlocking the economic opportunity for all communities in the Ring of Fire.
Horvath blames the previous Liberal government's lack of communication for the stalled framework around the Ring of Fire and fears the Ford administration could worsen Ontario's relationship with First Nations leaders. Tyler Kelleher, TBT News.
The Thunder Bay District Health Unit says blue-green algae has been confirmed on Icarus Lake, making it the third area lake to be identified with the potentially toxic organism in the past 2 weeks. The Ministry of the Environment has collected samples of the algae and is conducting tests to see if it's toxic. Those test results are expected next week. This follows similar finds on Hawkeye Lake, where toxin tests came back negative, and Lower Shabandowan Lake, where testing results have still not been released. Now, against the health unit is advising lake users to avoid drinking water from the lake, using it for household purposes, or swimming in it. People are also advised to keep their pets away from the water. The Green Party has selected its federal candidate for the Thunder Bay Rainy River riding. Amanda Modajung previously ran for the Greens in last year's provincial election in Thunder Bay Superior North, where she finished a distant fourth with just under 3% of the vote. She is a former member of the Canadian military and has also worked as an environmental technician and communications consultant. Modajung says her experience as a provincial candidate showed her that people are looking for change.
I got out, I knocked on a lot of doors, I talked to an awful lot of people, and they were all basically saying the same thing. Even with the provincial election, they're looking for change with the government. They're looking for something a little bit more accountable, honest, and so that's really what I want to bring into the federal election too, because people still want the same thing from their government. They want to be able to trust their leaders.
With Modajung's nomination, the slate of candidates is now set for Thunder Bay Rainy River, with Marcus Pulowski for the Liberals, Linda Ridholm for the Conservatives, Yuck Semwan for the NDP, and Andrew Hartnell for the People's Party of Canada. Municipal leaders are back this week in their respected communities after a successful AMO conference in Ottawa. The conference provided a chance for Natural Resources Minister John Yakabuski and Environment Minister Jeff Jurek to meet with area politicians regarding the ongoing situation with the caribou habitat. Earlier this year, leaders from across the North Shore region met in Nipigon to discuss plans by the province to create a discontinuous zone. They say doing so would kill the economic future of the area. In late May, traffic along the Nipigon River Bridge was stalled as a form of protest against the proposal. Red Rock Indian Band Chief Matt Dupuis says the meeting was very positive and some progress was made.
The Ontario government informed us that they are being more pushed down this road by the federal government. And it was quite to the contrary of some comments that were made at our open house in Nipigon back in June when federal MP was there and stated the opposite. So now we will be drafting a letter, both municipalities, the First Nations, along with both ministers, to Catherine McKenna and asking for a meeting to go over this area of concern.
Dupuy says the proposed discontinuous zone was against the PC's platform of open for business. And despite a federal election in less than 2 months, he is confident that the federal government will be able to meet with regional representatives. The union, which represented employees at the former Resolute Mill in Fort Frances, is calling on the province to take action to get the operation restarted. Unifor National Rep Stephen Boone is also urging the province to protect the rights of the publicly owned forest land in that part of the region. The mill closed in 2014 and was recently sold to River's Edge Developments. But Resolute placed restrictions on the sale, preventing the new company from producing forest products for 10 years. And Resolute plans to continue harvesting wood in that area for its other mills in Thunder Bay, Atikokan, and Ignace. Boone says that shouldn't be allowed. And with 15 mill closures over in the Northwest over the last decade, he says there's plenty of wood elsewhere for those mills to use. He's calling for the province to use every tool in its disposal to save the 600 jobs in Fort Frances. Minister Greg Rickford has met with the company, and he has pledged to have his government look at modernizing the license for the Crossroad Forest. Coming up after the break, federal dollars flow to twin more of Highway 1117. Residents of Dorian and all drivers who travel between Thunder Bay and Nipigon could have a safer commute if the federal government has its way. More than $37 million was announced on Friday to help finance the next section of the 4-lane divided highway project. The announcement comes less than 2 months before the federal election, and the money comes with a catch for the province. Alana Pickrell reports.
More than $37 million was announced by the federal government in order to expand an 8.6-kilometer stretch of Highway 1117, making it safer for all drivers. And although the federal government has stepped up with their checkbooks, the decision now lies in the provincial government's hands. Funding for construction is conditional, and the provincial government must consult with Indigenous groups, complete an environmental assessment, and then also match the funding amount. MP for Thunder Bay Superior North, Patty Haidu, says she urges the province to get on board with this project.
This is a matter of life and death in many cases. We've lost too many people this summer alone on this stretch of the highway, but also it's about the economy. And for a government that says that they are open for business, one would hope that that includes Northwestern Ontario.
If completed, the stretch of 2-lane highway will be transformed to a 4-lane divided highway and include 2 new bridges to replace the existing railway overpass near the We Met turnoff. And although the project is not written in stone, MPP Michael Gravel, who got half of the highway between Nipigon and Thunder Bay four-laned while he was a minister, says he's very sure that the Ford government will accept this offer.
I'm confident that indeed the Ontario government will welcome that and will match it and will help move this project forward. I'll be working with Minister Rickford and to the Minister of Transportation, as well as the Minister provincially of Infrastructure, to see that this project does move ahead. And with this kind of investment by the federal government, I think there's a good chance we'll see that happen.
For the Township of Dorian, this funding and potential partnership between the two governments is welcomed news.
And we're looking forward to a much safer route through our community. And besides, there's an economic development spin. We trust that there will be some development along the corridor.
Chambers adds that he hopes it will encourage people to buy properties or build in Dorian, since a four-lane highway would make it safer to get to Thunder Bay. A spokesperson for Ontario Transportation Minister Caroline Mulroney says her government welcomes federal funding for this section of highway and will be making an upcoming announcement on the construction timing. Alana Pickrell, TBT News.
In connection with a fatal motor vehicle collision on Highway 1117 last Monday. It happened near Pearl when an eastbound SUV that was making a left-hand turn was rear-ended by a tractor-trailer unit, sending it into the path of an oncoming pickup truck. The two occupants of the SUV were killed in the crash, and 4 people in the pickup had to be taken to hospital. Police subsequently charged the driver of the transport with careless driving. Now the OPP are looking for additional evidence. Witnesses to the collision or those who may have dashcam video are being urged to contact Thunder Bay OPP. Concerns are being raised within the trapping community after the reversal of a decision by the Ministry of Natural Resources, which reallocated a trap line for a non-Indigenous trapper to an Indigenous one. The Northwestern Fur Trappers Association worries it means that people's trap lines could be taken away at any time. But Red Rock Indian Band officials are praising the decision as it reflects historical practices and reconciliation. Adam Riley reports.
After initially granting a Nipigon area trapper a license for a trap line, the MNRF then rescinded it after a member of the Red Rock Indian Band provided evidence that their family had once operated the line during the 1800s. Red Rock officials notified the ministry the band would invoke the dispute resolution process under the province's Trapping Harmonization Agreement, and they argued the MNRF had not applied the policy correctly. Chief Matt Dupuis is happy to see the agreement and the government fulfill its duty.
It's nice now that a lot of people that do have historic ties to these areas have the opportunity to go back to their way of life their ancestors had, whether it was their grandparents, great-grandparents. Our Trappers Council for the Red Rock Indian Band is very happy to see the results.
However, the reversal has the president of the Northwestern Fur Trappers Association, Katie Ball, concerned more trappers could lose their lines. She believes all trappers should be treated equally and says the policy was presented properly before the reversal.
Again, each case is different. However, if the policies and procedures were followed according to the government in which they've already instated this, there wouldn't really have been a problem. Everyone can apply equally. Everyone has a points program equally, and that's the way it should be looked at.
There are also concerns that trappers won't be able to pass down their trap lines to their families as a result. However, Dupuis says many people will jump to that conclusion, but contests that all trap lines are historic in nature and believes very few will be lost as a result of the situation.
The worry that people won't be able to pass them on down generations, I mean, if it's been in their family all their life, I mean, then this agreement doesn't affect that.
The Fur Trappers Association also has many Indigenous members within its ranks, and Ball hopes the situation doesn't cause a rift within the organization.
We're all looking out for the best of the land, the animals of the land, and the stewardship of the land. So in the end, we shouldn't be fighting against each other. We should be working together.
Adam Riley, TBT News.
It's been just over 3 months since work crews began digging the foundations for the new sewage treatment plant in Red Rock. The long-awaited $25 million project will replace the current facility, which is nearing its 50th year of service. The town fought long for the funding for the project after delays increased costs by $7 million. Red Rock Mayor Gary Nelson is happy to see everything finally coming together, adding that he never thought construction would ever start. But now the project is well underway with much of the concrete foundations complete. Nelson says there has also been an economic boost as a result of the project.
Things are going great. You look behind me there and see all the buildings coming together. This is a company very, very good to work with. And like I say, everything's coming together. It's the one nice thing about this company, they hired pretty well all local employees, which was nice to see our young fellows in here working.
Construction is expected to halt for the winter months before restarting in the spring. Nelson says the new plant will be operational in 2020. Coming up after the break, a year of controversy at Lakehead University hires a new dean for its new law school. Stay tuned. Lakehead University has named the new dean at the Bora-Laskin School of Law. The hiring of Eula Hughes comes over a year after the controversial departure of Angelique Eaglewoman, who resigned citing systemic racism and discrimination at the school. But as Alana Pickerel reports, the new dean is focusing on the future, and she says it looks very promising.
With over 20 years of legal experience, Eula Hughes says she feels ready to take on her new role. She is currently a professor and research scholar at the University of New Brunswick and previously practiced law in Ottawa. Hughes will begin at Lakehead in October, marking the end of a turbulent year and a half at the law school, since former Dean Angelique Eaglewoman resigned and later sued the school for racial discrimination. Following her departure, the university appointed Justice Patrick Smith, who faced a conduct review for taking the position. The role was then passed on to David Barnett on an interim basis. Hughes says she has nothing to say about that pass, but will instead focus on the law students.
We have a constitutional mandate towards reconciliation. We will need lawyers that can really speak to those issues and that have cultural competencies and have legal competencies relevant to those areas. I think that's particularly important in Northern Ontario.
Hughes is also no stranger to Indigenous law. She has had significant research experience working with First Nations people on the East Coast, but has not yet worked in the Anishinaabe territory.
That's going to be a new relationship to be forged. but I've done a lot of community-based work, particularly in the context of supporting families when an Indigenous person goes missing.
She says there are numerous governmental and independent reports saying Indigenous people in Canada are not getting a fair shake, and law, especially at Lakehead, has the potential to change that.
We have to make credible moves towards reconciliation, and we also have to make credible moves towards access to justice. Right? These are very big challenges. They're not going to be solved by one law school. But Lakehead has really shown a lot of leadership in moving those two key issues forward.
Alana Pickrell, TBT News.
The town of Red Rock is looking to give its recreation center a partial facelift. The rec center has long been a hub for the community with its arena, bowling alley, and restaurant, but it's starting to show its age. Mayor Gary Nelson says because the town is operating the facility all year long, there have been some noticeable issues which have plagued the building.
The seniors' room, we're getting water in there on the floor. We're putting new floor in there. The floor is shot already. So there's that room there. It's got to be windows, siding outside fixed on that. And the back part facing Lake Superior has never had any siding put on the restaurant or the weight room, and it's kind of an eyesore right now, so we want to get that fixed up.
The cost for the repairs and upgrades to the complex is an estimated $200,000. A well-known Indigenous leader is stepping away from the limelight, at least for now. Red Rock Indian Band Chief Matt Dupuis has decided not to run in the upcoming election in his community. First elected to council in 2015, Dupuis became chief after former chief Edward Wawier and was elected to the Anishinaabe Nation's Regional Deputy Grand Chiefs Council in 2018. His many accomplishments include his work on the caribou situation and pushing for both economic and socio-economic issues in the region. But there are a pair of issues that he says he particularly fought hard for and wanted to see started prior to his departure.
And obviously being the start of the construction of the east-west tie. Another one is our chalet lodge being up and operational, and those things are happening. So all the other ones that you listed, yes, those are always going to be continual issues in the area. But the one thing I could say is hopefully maybe as a form of a legacy is that is the importance of the region working together.
The Red Rock Indian Band will choose a new chief and council next weekend. And that'll do it for this edition of Northwest Newsweek. I'm Nima Rajan. Take care.